Hi guys, I'm Ginger, clearly. I do work at SAP. We're a software company, and fun fact, by your definition, Ms. Brooke, 98% of the top 100 most valued brands in America, actually in the world, run SAP software. This is not software that most people recognize. I'm really proud of the work that we do there, and I am the content lead at SAP globally for industries and for sustainability. Actually, yeah, we'll just go with that. My co-presenter is my husband. And fair warning, this workshop usually is 4 hours, and so we've compressed it. We'll be going really, really fast. I, at least, am not at all precious, so if you have questions, you can shout them out or raise your hands, or catch us afterwards. We do realize that we're standing between you and the cocktail reception. So, take it away.
I think they did a terrific job of introducing me. The bottom line being that I've got years and years of committed interest in storytelling. So we're going to go very deep today. I know a lot of times marketers hear, A, that you're supposed to tell a story, but also B, that that you need to tell a story, but just how to do it, we're going to go really deep and get a little bit more detail than what you normally see. Go ahead.
You bet. So, as he just stole my line, we're always told that we are supposed to tell stories. Again, we're not told how to tell a story. And so I think that there's an assumption that because we've all been hearing stories and we've been interacting with stories since we were little, that we're just sort of innately able to construct a story.
And this is very much like saying, well, I've been listening to music my whole life, so you're going to wake up tomorrow and write a symphony, and if you told marketers that, they'd probably panic a little bit. But what we're going to do here is we're going to begin with telling you, or dealing with what a story is, why you need to tell a story, and then we're going to get really into detail on how to tell a story. So, the first question is, and I love doing this when I go to these conferences. Been a lot of times there, I'll go to people and say, hey, just what is a story? I mean, if you're told you've got to tell a story, what's the definition of it? And we could ask you guys, but generally what I get is, what is a story? And eventually people come around to getting it.
Any guesses? Somebody want to take a run at it? Go for it. Ooh, I like that. I like that better than what Google gave me. Google told me that a story is a narrative. Okay, fair enough. I was looking for a dictionary. I got a thesaurus. So, Google, what is a narrative? It's an account. Thank you so much, Google. So, what's an account? It's a story. So, that was kind of fun, but not exactly what I would call helpful.
So.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? Let me interrupt right quick. And for those of you who are actually catching this on the live stream, thank you so much for your patience. One of the things, the reason that we're presenting together, yes, we are husband and wife, but Ed has been classically trained. He is a Shakespearean scholar and a master storyteller, and so he'll give you the classical examples of storytelling. What I will do is apply that to marketing. So that's why we're going to be bouncing back and forth. So, since Google failed us,
a story is a form of communication that is comprised of a series of reactions that take place over time. Okay, and that over time part that we've got on there is the critical issue of what makes a story and separates it from information.
Let me give you a good example here. This is one of my favorite paintings. It's called Nighthawks. It's by a painter named Edward Hopper. I believe this one hangs in Chicago. The Art Institute of Chicago. And whenever I'm in Chicago, I go to visit it. It never changes. It's quite evocative, right? I can imagine all kinds of stories going on here, such as, where in the world was this, where the street was so clean. But it's not a story.
It's not a story because it doesn't change over time. However, as much as I like that, one of my favorite movies is Die Hard, if you're familiar with that at all. And here we have two pictures, and yes, they're both Bruce Willis playing John McClane. The first one is at the beginning of the movie. He's on the airplane. He's actually a nervous flyer. He's got a great big old teddy bear that he's going to bring to his daughter for Christmas, right? So let's suppose you started watching that movie and got interrupted, and you went away and you came back 2 hours later. You're going to see him there. He's already wiped out 6 terrorists. You got a high-rise building that's completely on fire. There's helicopters flying around, ambulances. He's bloodied and beaten. And guess what? Things have changed over time, and that's a story. And and if this sounds a little bit mathematical here, change over time is a story. Yes, it is. So we tend to think sometimes in our postmodern world that a story is just something that you feel, that you can just sort of throw out there. But it turns out that in reality, there are very specific rules for telling a good story and what a definition of a story is.
Now I have to...
Oh, no, I was just going to say also, we'll find out too over time, if you remember, if you've done any art history classes or something, that there's always a debate back and forth between classicism and romanticism. And under romantic movements, we tend to just tell stories or paint paintings from our feelings. And again, we're in that sort of a mode here now. But if you think about the neoclassical period, the Renaissance period, we get more rule-oriented.
Yep. So, as marketers, we love our infographics and we love our features and benefits list, and they absolutely have a place in our entire campaign, in the buyer's journey. But they're not stories, right? They're a collection of facts. So keep this in mind, because we will come back to this at the end.
Here's a little thought experiment coming for you. Suppose that we had a spectrum of academic disciplines. So think about all the things you could major in college, right? And you're going to put the most objective things on one end and the most subjective things on the other end. And I'm going to start here for you. On the most objective end, I like to think of arithmetic. Arithmetic, because 2 + 2 is always 4. It's been that for a long time. We can prove that. It's in every country, anywhere you want to find. And on the very subjective end, I'm going to put religion. And the reason I'm putting religion there is because it requires a complete willing suspension of disbelief, right? If you have an argument about religion or a discussion about it, I guess I should say, it's always going to come down to somebody saying, well, you've just got to take it on faith, right? So now here's the question. Where do we put marketing on the spectrum?
Anybody? Yeah. I'm sorry, what was that answer? Towards religion. No, I'm going to put marketing right smack in the messy middle. Primarily because when you are working with marketing, you are starting from the subjective end, right? We talk about the buyer's journey. We always have stories, and whether it be, stories that are the customer success story, which is, classically defined as a story, track and measure. And we also want to look at the attribution, right? And so one of the things that we are doing with marketing is we are starting at one end, moving over towards the other.
Now, earlier, my new friend Brooke mentioned about getting someone to buy a drink at the bar when you need to. We're going to talk about the marketer's bar now. So let's imagine, for example, that a marketer decided they're going to open a bar. All right, but for whatever reason, they decided, maybe a shortage of labor, they're going to hire a sales guy to work behind the bar. And the customer walks in and he says, am I miserable? I wrecked my car, my wife is leaving me, I got 4 kids in college, and I'm 20 pounds overweight. What does the sales guy do? Well, he whips out a menu and says, look, we got 6 beers on tap, we got 12 in the bottle, what do you want? Right? But we love the sales guys, and there's a place for them. But a marketer, a compassionate marketer, instead will whip out an infographic and say, hey, 70% of car wrecks happen 10 miles from the home, $1.3 trillion in student loan debt nationwide, 2/3 of adults overweight, and 40% of marriages end in divorce. So, not quite what you would hope for. But the really great marketer is going to say, look, this is Brooks kind of bartender here. I hear you, buddy. This is a rough story. Let me fix you up with a beer, and I'm going to tell you a story about somebody that experienced a similar thing. That's a great marketer.
So a lot of times marketers talk about targeting our prospects. It's what we do. I would instead suggest maybe we should romance our prospects. We want to build a relationship with them, right? We want to start out nice and simple, and we want to sort of encourage them along the line. A really brilliant man has a quote that I love to use ever since his book came out this year. You might remember him. He was one of the first guys speaking, Tom Shapiro. And what he wrote was, and I'm going to read this to get it exactly right. When a person reads a story, their brain chemistry actually changes. The brain releases oxytocin and reduces cortisol and pain. The psychological and physiological effects of storytelling are undeniable. Right? So that was Tom Shapiro in his new book, Rethink Lead Generation. Courtship, actually, this romancing the lead, is actually very Darwinian. For the species to survive, people told stories, right? Well, the peacock has to sort of shake his tail feathers to lure the peahen over, right? But humans are the only ones who actually tell stories. And as marketers, it's important for us to know that it's important for the survival of our brand as well.
What's really fascinating to me is that stories themselves are a Darwinian adaptation. They've been around for 100,000 years, and we've gotten better and better at it as we went along. So if you ever wondered, as I did for many years, why is it that the good guy always wins at the end? Because if the bad guy won, it would be a bad story, and people that told bad stories died out. Like 100,000 years ago, they died out. And this is why you never see a Neanderthal on the bestseller list, ever. So storytelling is necessary for the survival of the species, as she says. And the important thing is, though, that because of all of these years of evolution, it will affect people on a very primal level. If you're telling a great mythic story, that's why you want to tell a story.
Here's a fun fact for you. The objective science of marketing research is 100 years old.
Yes, and we have another fun fact, all right? Market research is 100 years old. Storytelling, making the rules of it, the rules of aesthetics are 2,500 years old, and actually beyond. If you want to go all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a Babylonian thing, you're talking 3,000 plus years beyond that. So, in my opinion anyway, we can and should judge stories, right? It isn't all just postmodern. If you put it out there, it must be good. There are rules of it that will help you tell good stories as a marketer. Now we're going to focus here today on these ancient philosophers, but we're going to be talking about the big ideas on this thing. So this is transferable to all cultures all around the world. This is human nature that we're talking about. And so the oldest of the philosophers were the metaphysicists, like Thales and Pythagoras, and they were talking about the big things like the meaning of life. And we're not going to do the meaning of life here today because it's a little out of our scope. So we're just going to slide past that one to the next group.
And they were followed by the sophists. And these were the folks who thought that truth was relative. And, they actually were sort of kind of on the forefront of sort of democracy, if you will, right? So they were all about persuasion, right? So to illustrate that point, if you have two people in the room, say, I don't know, a husband and wife, and one of them is in shorts and his flip-flops, and the other one is under a blanket in August, it's because it's true that it's both hot and cold in that room, right? And that's where the sophists came in. They were all about the art of persuasion. This was where you lead into democracy, right? Who could persuade someone more or better than the other?
So that was more significant to be able to make the best argument. And that seems to be true for marketers too. You want to make the best argument against things. The sophists also came up with this idea of the rhetorical situation. Okay, and what you would have is you had a rhetor, a speaker, or in that case, a marketer. You would have a message, you have a medium, and the message flows through the medium to the audience. Bingo, you've got persuasive communication, right? Well, okay, until something goes wrong, right? What if your audience isn't listening, right? What if they're speaking a different language, or your message is just full of jargon, or ends up in their spam folder, or you send it to some place where they don't live, or maybe your SEO doesn't find your site to begin with, or perhaps it's blocked out by a myriad of pop-up ads. So this is, of course, what you're after is the head nod. Now, the old days, when you were doing door-to-door sales, or you were at the marketplace and you were selling stuff, you knew you were going to be successful if you got the head nod. The problem is here now, I'm looking out here at the camera, and I believe that there's people out there. The question is whether they're nodding their head with me right now or not. And how do we know that? Well, George Potts was here earlier, and I was pretty darn impressed because he was looking at some information that was like really recent, instant, right? And then you could react on it, I think. I mean, election day is coming up very quickly, so if he's getting this information today about the elections, are you able to act upon that? However, if you tell great stories at the outset, if you use the mythic basis of stories up front, you have a better shot of getting positive results from your research on down the line.
As a comic aside, I actually like to think of this as your traditional marketer who's just banging his head against the wall going, fly. Moving right along to Socrates.
Socrates. Now, Socrates was actually one of the sophist, but he was kind of on the outside. They didn't like him too much because he wasn't making money. The other guys were like getting money for being campaign. They were like George, right? Making money off of advising people on how to tell good stories. But Socrates said, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think, right? And this is, again, true for marketers, all right? You can't say, take the knowledge that's in your brain and just sort of implant it in their head. You have to persuade them to come to those conclusions. And that's the basis of the Socratic method, right? He's going to ask a series of leading questions until somebody comes to that conclusion. If you have children, you know how that goes. Sorry. No, that's fine. Okay, and the interesting thing is that stories are also Socratic, because the spine of a story also has a central question to it. Will the guy get the girl? Will the detective find the bad guy, or what have you? And so by using stories in that fashion, you can vicariously get your audience to come to some understanding at the end too. And now we come to Plato. And you might be familiar with the allegory of Plato's cave. I'm not going to go too deep in that, but Plato said, or distinguished between objects and concepts, right? And these different things. So if you think about like a car, right? What is a car? A car is a machine with 4 wheels on it. You can't deny that. But a car is also something that will get you to the grocery store and back. And so what you want to do is market the concept and sell the object.
So I'm going to give you a really quick example of this that we're all familiar with, and it's the old, nobody really wants to buy a drill. What they want is a hole, right? So you market the hole, but you sell the drill, right? The difference between us and sales.
Plato had some things, we're going to go through this quickly. Another idea, he separated the soul from the body, and he divided the soul up into 3 parts: logic, emotion, and desire. These are ways in which marketers can appeal to their audience. And finally, here we're going to come to Aristotle. And Aristotle is one of my favorites. It's sort of interesting. Aristotle went about his business to try to discover the rules of storytelling. And I say discover because the rules of storytelling, if we think back to that Darwinian thing that we're saying, they already were inherent. So he wasn't making stuff up, oh, you should do it this way or do it that way. He was trying to figure out how stories worked. Now, I'm going to tell you another thing about Aristotle here is he was writing about Greek theater. Why? Well, because that was the only form of mass communication at that time. So a little bit about Greek theater, what it was about. If you think about like the festivals we have today, you know, Spring Break or the Coachella Festival or something like that, they were having a wine festival, a harvest festival every year. There's the big one, Dionysus Festival, right? And basically people would come and they'd get really drunk and carry on, which was great. This kind of was disturbing, though, to the elders of the community. He thought, we should teach these guys a moral lesson in here somewhere and straighten them out. And so that's what they did. They got this Greek chorus together, and they sort of chanted and waved their fingers at people, and that didn't go over too well, really, either. So then they got this new idea. They're going to tell them a story. They're going to tell them about the Greek gods, and they're going to have blood and guts and all sorts of things. And then at the end of it, there will be this lesson that they're going to take away. So that's where Aristotle was coming from. And so, for example, Oedipus Rex, one of the big ones written by Sophocles. And the deal with Oedipus was that he, let me ask you this. Has anybody here ever wanted to kill their father and marry their mother? Anybody had a desire to do that? Because if you did, you got two choices. You could kill your father and marry your mother, and you would know exactly what it's like. Or you could read or watch Oedipus and find out what happened to him. And that caused a great plague on Thebes. His wife hanged herself, and he gouged his eyes out and lived in misery the rest of his life. And so you go, okay, maybe I'll learn that lesson and I won't do that.
So, okay, for modern marketers, no gouging of the eyes, but if you were to go to, say, Yelp or TripAdvisor and you get reviews there, that is a way of, if you were to go to read them, if you were to go to read them, that's a way for you to vicariously experience something that maybe you want to try. So it's in that sort of pre-purchase place.
Yeah, Amazon reviews are not as bloody as Oedipus, but, are exciting.
Well, it depends.
But they're helpful.
Pretty bad.
All right, now we're moving over into exactly how to tell a story. We're going to give you the real meat and potatoes here, all right? Aristotle developed a sort of what I think of as a recipe for storytelling. People call it Aristotle's 6 dramatic elements, the 6 things that go into it. And those elements are opsis, melody, character, dialogue, theme, and action. Okay, and this to me it's like baking a cake. All right, Aristotle himself said that action is the most important ingredient. Well, if you think about that, you're baking a cake. Is the flour more important than the eggs or the salt? There might be more flour, but you need to have all of them. All of these things need to combine together, which, by the way, is one of the things that makes Shakespeare so great. I mean, he figured that part out where Aristotle didn't. But you combine all of these elements together. Further, you have to consume them all at once. So you're not going to do one paragraph in your story that's about action and another paragraph about character. You have to pull all of these things together, and that's the real trick of storytelling. So we're going to take them one at a time. We're going to talk about opsis first. Now, opsis is an odd word. It's an obsolete word. If you use it in Scrabble, you're not going to fly on that. Nobody uses it anymore. All right, and most people who will talk about Aristotle's 6 dramatic elements will call it spectacle. Okay, and by that, most people will mean, they're talking about the car chases, the fight scenes, right, the blood. But I think when I go back and I read Aristotle, there's a little more nuance in what he's doing. Opsis comes from the same root as like synopsis or optical, and it means vista. So for Aristotle, he was literally talking about the Greek theater. He was talking about everything that you could see on the stage. It was all that you could see.
So if you're a film student, right, the French came up with a word for this.
The mise en scene is what they call it in film. It's everything within the frame of the film.
Box, right? So the screen on your computer or on your iPhone or what have you. So for marketers, it is everything that you see, but we take it a little step further, and it's basically what you consume with your senses, right? So if you make a video and people see it, right, that's good. You could do a podcast where they hear it. Maybe you're at an event and you're giving out samples and you can feel that cashmere sweater. Or you can taste the new flavor of ice cream, or you can smell the new perfume, right? So for a marketer, the opsis really is everything that you take in through your senses.
The next element is melody, and a lot of times people, again, when they're translating this, will call it music and think that that's what Aristotle is talking about. Disagree again. Because the Greeks actually in their theater did have a lot of music. They did have that chanting chorus in that way. But Aristotle actually used the word melody, and for him that was the melic of the ode, sort of a portmanteau word. And melic was singing, and ode was a song or a story. So it was the singing of the story. But here's the kicker to all of this, is that his emphasis, Aristotle's, was on the singing of the story. So this is the performance of the story.
So as marketers, what we need to think of ourselves as, me talk pretty one day. As marketers, think of ourselves as the orchestrator of the story. And what we're going to be controlling is the pacing. We're going to be controlling what type of content we put into our marketing campaign. We're going to be paying particular attention to the white spaces. So what do I mean by that? We're all very much aware of the war going on in Ukraine. My company, like many others, decided to go dark on social for a while. Well, I had to manage my campaign around the fact that I just lost a piece of what I had planned to have in market, and I had to fill that gap, right? So that's how the marketers are orchestrating the pacing. We have our annual user conference is happening in Florida next week on the 10th. And, thousands and thousands of people converging on Florida. So we have been building a steady drumbeat. It started out where we did it's coming, maybe back in January. We started doing a monthly update, and then it turned into a weekly drip campaign via email. And, if my plan, which was a beautiful plan, you guys, was I was building up to daily social. So I was increasing the tempo because of this event that was coming up. So my campaign sort of dictated that. If you were creating a campaign around, say, upcoming research, you might change your tempo. You might want to do a big splash. That's what I mean by orchestrating your story.
And say too that editing is that's all about, whether it was film or text editing. Sure. It's analogous to what we're talking about with Melody.
And I had to edit out my social.
The next element is character, and this one is pretty straightforward. What it is, at least it seems, that it is the people and the things that populate your story. However, the background on this is very interesting. In Aristotle's time, nobody would have used character in this way. He used it first. A character back then was a mark that a tradesman would put in, say, like a clay pot, right, to suggest that it's theirs. Okay, and so if you think too, they look very much like alphabetical letters. So today we talk about a tweet having 280 characters in it. That's why they say that. But this tradesman, this craftsman, would then go to the market with his pots, and he would trade it for a duck or some wheat or something like that. And that's why they became known as trademarks. And further, past that, in the livestock industry, they have a similar thing, but they use for cattle, and it's brand. They have brands that they put on there. So that's where this whole thing comes from.
So as marketers, we can have our customers or ourselves in our stories as characters, but we should also have our products and our services. And when you think about it, when we say that something is off-brand, it means it's out of character. So I know what the RGB codes are for my brand. We have a blue and we have a gold and we have some gray and we have, all the different, and I know what those RGBs are. And I can look at a PowerPoint and immediately spot if it's off-brand because they weren't using the appropriate ones. Sometimes it's the voice. We're a global company, and up until recently at least, we never used contractions. It was off-brand. It was out of character, simply because it made translation very, very difficult. Contractions don't always translate well. So our brand guidelines said, don't do that, right? So your tone, anything that goes into creating your brand can make up the character for you. And then you can put that into your story depending on, of course, what sort of asset you're making. That will become clear when I show it to you at the end.
And so now we're going to talk about dialogue as the next element. Dia, in ancient Greek, would have meant between two things, and log is a pile of words. Basically, it's a group of words. And if you think back to the rhetorical situation, it's pretty obvious what we're talking about here. Obviously, Aristotle was talking about a script, but we're talking about words flowing from the stage to the audience.
And obviously, for marketers, we all know that language, right, is very key to our character, our brand.
And then we move on to theme, and theme is very important for marketers. To begin with, we're not talking about a party theme. This is not luau's here that we're talking about. This is actually the message the marketers have to put across. All right, for Aristotle in his time, he would have been thinking about the moral of the story. Aesop was a number of years prior to him, about 500 years earlier, but still, slow and steady wins the race. Now, there's a couple of things you got to know, and this is critical for marketers, all right? When you talk about a theme, you have to take a position on something. And I've seen many marketing programs go down in flames by not doing that. So I'll put it in terms of another story. If you're talking about the theme of the story is money, no. Because you have to say, what about money? Money is the root of all evil. Money makes the world go around. You got to take a position on things like that. The other thing that you need to know about things is you get one to a story. Go ahead.
In marketing, slogans can be a theme, right? Nothing runs like a deer. Or, I love L'Oreal's, right? Because I'm worth it. I think theirs is actually because you're worth it, but you'll forgive me for using it my way. You can have a factual message be your theme. You have to be really careful and clever about how you do it. And one of my favorite, whom I think does it really, really well, is 15% can save you, 15 minutes can save you 15% on your car insurance. I mean, there's a lot of facts in there. It's quite memorable. They take a position, and there's only one. You know, it's a beautiful example. To the point about the theme, if you find yourself with more than one theme, what you have is bullet lists, right? I find it interesting that we call it bullet lists and we talk about targeting our prospects.
It's a little frightening.
Disturbing. Sorry, off theme.
And finally, we're coming to action, which is the last element. And action, by the way, too, most people, again, if they're talking about the Aristotle's elements, they're going to call this plot. And plot is a different thing than action, all right? Action is what drives the story forward. And I prefer to think of it as reactions, right? So you have an inciting incident, you have a reaction to that incident. You have a reaction to that reaction, a reaction to that reaction. So when it comes to, you think about actors, they're always going, oh, what's my motivation? They want to know what action they're going to react to. But listen to the words, I mean, actor, acting, action, it's all the same part of the same idea that moves the story forward and helps to change things over time.
And if you're going down the road of planning for your next campaign, if you're getting ready for the next, let's suppose that you're on a calendar fiscal year, and so it's October, it's November, you're starting to plan for 2023, you probably should and could map your marketing story similar to what you see here. And that is one of the fun things that we're going to show you coming up. But let's talk about stories.
Rota Fortunae is actually, we're a little bit away from Aristotle here. This is a Babylonian concept, and our picture here is from a medieval period, all right? So the Wheel of Fortune, all right? We've got the goddess Fortune over here, and what happens is she's going to stick your fate on this wheel. And if you look at the guy over there on the left, right, he's a lover character. And he starts out, he doesn't have a girl. His fortune is not great at the start of the story. But by the time the story ends, he gets the girl, his fortune rises. At the top, we've got a king. He's pretty powerful and got it going on at the beginning of the story, and he's going to have it going on at the end of the story. On the other side, we've got a soldier character, actually. And he starts out very strong and stalwart at the beginning of the story, but by the time he comes back from the war, he's bloody and beaten. And at the bottom, we've got a serf who wakes up every day and toils and goes to sleep and wakes up the next day and does it again. So his life starts out unfortunate and continues to be unfortunate at the end of the story. So it turns out, you've probably heard before, how many stories are there? Well, there's only 4 stories, and everything is a variation on those 4 stories.
So I'm going to give some modern examples and then try to give some marketing examples as well. So if you want the rising hero, this is Harry Potter. He starts out as, you know, the sort of unwanted orphan, but he saves the wizarding world, right? Pretty cool, right? For marketers, this could be something like the customer success story, right? So you can map that in there. That's the rising hero. Superman, every single episode, every single comic book, he starts out on top of the world and he winds up on top of the world. He is always saving the day. For marketers, let's go on ahead and make a product the hero, right? Drano is always going to open your drain. It's going to get rid of that clog right before you have all those people coming over for a party, right? So your sink's going to be operable. This is Dr. Frankenstein, who starts out as a brilliant, well-respected scientist, and he has a severe, tragic fall. So for marketers, maybe this is the story of a product, of a customer who used a competitor's product, or maybe used the wrong product. So my company makes ERP software, which runs, multi-billion-dollar corporations. It also runs smaller corporations. But we run into a lot of these, fast growth companies who are trying to do business on Outlook and Excel, and they just can't make it work because that's not what those products were designed to do. So they didn't necessarily do something wrong, but tragically, their business is going downhill until they get the right software in there. And then down at the bottom, my favorite, poor Wile E. Coyote, he is never going to get the road runner. So for marketers, this could be about a perennial problem that your customers face. So when I look at this, I think of the life sciences industry because, we help them, they overcome a regulation and they're sitting on top of the world, they think, and then boom, here comes another regulation, right? So ways to look at the different four heroes.
And here's another Aristotle device. He talks about, and this is again very, very important for marketers, that all stories have to go through 3 stages: pity, fear, and catharsis. Okay, and the best example of this is Wizard of Oz. Right? You think about Dorothy at the beginning of the story. All right, her entire life is in black and white. There is nothing going on. She's in the Depression. There's nobody around anywhere. Right, so you got to feel sorry for her up front. This is not a good life, and she wants to go somewhere beyond the rainbow. Then all of a sudden, here she is in Munchkin land. We got munchkins, we got witches, we've got flying monkeys coming at her, and suddenly you're going to fear. And so your stories happen vicariously, right? If you pity up front with her, suddenly that's going to cause you to fear in the second part. In Hollywood, this is what they call the classic Hollywood 3-act structure. You got a 2-hour movie. The first half hour, you can set your watch to it. The first half hour is going to be the pity part. Then you're going to have an hour of fear. And then you're going to have a half hour of catharsis. And this catharsis is a purging of emotions where you go, oh, that's right, yay, you're going after it.
If you've ever gone to a movie or read a book where you just really didn't care what happens, they probably didn't do a good job of setting up the pity part at the beginning. Now, for marketers, this is my complaint. I've spoken with a lot of marketers who share it. My customers don't always want to reveal what a train wreck they were before, we were able to help them, right? And so the customer success stories are a little bit dissatisfying, right? Because we don't have time to build up the pity part for them. So what we try to do is position it. Ann Hanley was one of the ones who really did a nice job of outlining how the customer is the hero of the story. You have to, encourage them to see that, it was not their fault that there was this mess to begin with, and they really were heroic for figuring it out and turning their company around. Yeah, I haven't been really successful at getting a lot of customers to still be willing to reveal that. And I must admit, even though my son has a JD, lawyers get in the way a lot of the time too.
So it goes.
Okay.
All right, now I promised you I was talking about,
No, I was just going to say, this is the part that I've been driving through. I kept telling you we're going to show you how to do the plotting and how to apply it to marketing. This is the part.
I told you that plot was not the same thing as action, all right? A plot is like a map. All right, this is the distinction between a map of Philadelphia and Philadelphia, okay? So this is our map of the story is what a plot is. And so, but I remember too, I told you back that there's kind of mathematical. And we've been talking about change over time. So let's create that algebraic function, okay? And we're gonna do a plot line, right? We've got our axes, our x-axes and our y-axes, and we're gonna put time at the bottom, which makes sense, right? And we're gonna have change over time. Now you might ask, what's going to change? Well, pretty much everything is going to change over the course of the story except one thing. Remember, you only get one theme and you're going to stick with it for the whole story. And when you guys are marketing, I'm telling you, one of the best things you can do is write down what your message is, stick it up there on your computer board or in front of your computer, and never lose track of it so that you don't get your message confused as you go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just throw in the algorithm here. You'll have to trust me on this one. That's the way it goes. By the way, this is where we would probably spend more time if we could to pull this out, but we're going to do our best with it. So the first point down there is what they call the point of attack. And it's the very first second of anything. It's the very first frame of the film. It's the very first letter of whatever it is that you've got writing. Okay. After that comes this primary stasis. You see that it's flat at that part of the line. This is everyday life. This is Dorothy on the farm. And it's what nothing's gone on. And then comes a very exciting point, the inciting incident. That inciting incident is and then one day, or all of a sudden, And in the case of Dorothy and many other stories, it's going out of that gate and suddenly being on an adventure. And then the inciting incident gives rise to the central or dramatic question. So if Dorothy leaves the gate, what do we want to know? We want to know if she's going to get back home. All right. After that, we've got rising action. We got all kinds of stuff that happens from there. She's wrestling around with it until we get to this point here, this anagnorisis. And that's going to be another odd word for you, but that's a word, again, developed by Aristotle. And particularly for screenwriters and things, this is a pivotal point of change that happens. This is a point in the story in which the hero goes, I got this. I can make this happen, right? So Dorothy, she's throwing a bucket of water on the witch. And suddenly, where she was worried about getting home before, now she's sort of badass. And she can go home or go over to that wizard and tell him what's what, right? And what happens after that point of anagnorisis is where all the action happens. This is the big chase scene. So you've heard the term, surely, the cut to the chase. Right? That's film lingo for cut to the point of anagnorisis. Only it's not as buzzy. But anyway, you cut to that point of anagnorisis, you have the big chase scene, and finally you get up to the climax. And the climax is where the problem is resolved. Dorothy gets home, and guess what? That central question is going to be answered. Will she get home? Yes, she gets home. But more importantly, or as importantly, that's where the message comes in. Right? I told you before that if you bring marketers along, or the audience along on that sort of ersatz experience, right? It's vicarious with somebody else, and they feel that release, okay? The catharsis. That's where this happens. And so the four things that really always go together, the dramatic question, the inciting incident, the climax, the theme, all have to complement each other. And typically for marketers, you're going to start writing your story if you were to create this plot line, you're going to start with that message. And you have the message, and then you go, what would be a good climax that would give me that message? And once you know what the climax is, then you know what the question that you want to ask, and you go back to the beginning, and you can get an inciting incident with that, ask that question. This is one of my favorite quotes from producers. This is good life message, which is, when the monster is dead, the movie is over. All right. How often have you seen Hercule Poirot wandering around, going on and on and on about things that you're bored? And you should do this with your marketing stories too. Once you've made your message, you're done. Get out of there. That's the end. After that, we do have, just look out, not very much time, but it is the falling action, or the denouement, which is French for the untying of things, or I like to think of it as the tying up of the loose ends. Very, very little of that. So you got a little time for that, and you can put your call to action in here, but I prefer to think of it as a motivation to react, because we got reactions going all the way through here. So, if I say, honey, get me a beer, she might just say, no, get it yourself. But if I say, if you get me a beer, I might make it worth your while, then you've got a whole other thing going on, right? And then after that, you've got a secondary stasis where you go back to normal life. And finally, the last thing is the point of release, where you're done talking with the customer, at least for this time around. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're going to back up and do this from the marketer's point of view. It'll go a little bit fast. Apologies for this. Usually we have handouts and you would actually do this with your own company's products and services. But I'm going to try to take you through it. If you have questions, please, by all means, stop me. You have the point of attack. So think about your planning for 2023, your next fiscal year, whatever comes first. And, in your industry, maybe there's a new regulation that came through, you did a new piece of research, something's happening, but up until you're ready to release, you're still going to be cruising along with the marketing that you already have in market, right? You're still going to be communicating. It's day-to-day life here. And when you have that inciting incident, and it's up to you as the marketer to orchestrate, is your inciting incident really going to be that new announcement that's coming out, or is it the fact that you just did some research that you want to release, right? So you are in control because you're orchestrating your story here. But your dramatic question is raised. So every year that we go into planning, right, we have to determine what is it that we want to tell people to get more customers, to get repeat customers, and that therein lies your dramatic question. You're going to have your rising action. This is where you're going to start releasing your different campaign assets, and you're going to determine how quickly you release them, in what channels you release them, et cetera, right? What is the format? You're going to get to the point of anagnosis. When you get to this point, this is where you absolutely want to start bringing in your infographics and your features and benefits, right? Because you've been romancing them this whole way along. You've been telling them the story. You've got your red thread going. You're crisp. You took your theme. You posted. You tattooed it on your forehead practically. So you know what. You know that you're on message. You know that you're on brand. So let's start bringing in some proof points here. You get to the climax, and this is where you start seeing hype start to build, right? And you're like, woohoo, I made my KPIs, guys. I can do this, right? So you get to your climax where you've hit your numbers. The entire thing has come together here, right? So, if we've done our job correctly, people are seeing that we're delivering on all of our promises. The monster does not come into play, hopefully, marketing. And the denouement is when we're shifting over to sales, right? We're releasing because, honestly, once they're in the sales pipe, what are we going to do? Send them another brochure? No, we're done with them. So that's, at this point, we're at secondary stasis and we're at the point of release. So you can actually, use each of these pieces should be telling stories, but at the same time, each of those stories should connect together with your red thread messaging, which is telling the full story of your campaign, right? We should not ever find ourselves constantly in doing one-offs, right? Because then we're not managing that customer journey very well. In secondary stasis, we're moving them into the nurture stream, and this is where, we're moving them into the affinity stream, and this is where, we're trying to build even tighter relationships so that, we can, continue them as customers, but we don't want them to leave us.
Let me re-emphasize too that this paradigm is useful for your smallest tweet, yes, to your biggest white paper, to your advertising, to entire campaigns. It's all the same thing all the time, and to a lesser extent to the customer's journey, which is a little bit more difficult to control. But
we're getting a little bit tight on time, but I will tell you, so this is kind of fun. I told you I have a son who's a JD, so just for fun, I trademarked a phrase. It's called a digital chop shop. So I will actually, Tom was telling you that, I did 600 and some odd pieces in a single campaign where I started with a white paper, and we customized it for 26 different industries, and then I started taking little pieces out of it, right? So I was doing podcasts, and I actually took the white paper and I made audio versions of them, so just like you listen to a book, and I got a lot of senior executives listening because they did not have the time to read. White papers are very, very difficult to read, and they take a long time because the sentences are just, they're stuffed with information. They're 6 lines long, and you have to know how it's ending in order to really get the intonation right. So you wind up reading that same sentence over and over and over again. Well, I just hired a professional voiceover artist, and I let him do the heavy lifting. So I created all kinds of different assets all the way through, and each one of them was adhering to this same principle. And by the way, I said and I'm really sorry about that. It sounds like Friday night at the opera. Me. I work with an amazing team. So my team and I did this. It wasn't me, just by myself. And I'm very proud of that example. And just like every other marketer, I won't share all my failures with you. But that was a great success. So we've heard I know this is telling me time is up, so we're going to wrap. You've heard the paradigm. You can have good, fast, and cheap. You can have 2. You cannot have all 3. right? What you can do, I'm just going to cut, it's the old paradigm, right? You throw money at something, but you still need time. 9 women can't have a baby in a month. Not going to happen, right? So what you can do as you practice this is
you can become more efficient with this. And so I'd like to think that you all became expert storytellers over this last 42 minutes here. But the reality is what I'm hoping is you open your eyes to what's out there and what's available, what you can do, and learn more about storytelling along those lines. Because if you get really good at it and you have a common language with the people you're working with, and you can use words like opsis or anagnorisis or something like that, and go, oh, that's what it is, or you can spot what a problem is that quick, you're going to be able to get the story done faster. You'll be gooder, better, faster, cheaper. So,
if you would like to connect with either or both of us on LinkedIn because you want more of the information, I told you this is typically a longer workshop. We do have more material. Just mention this event. We're happy to share it with you. But the reason I say mention the event is because, we get our fair share of people who are trying to help us with our car warranty as well. So
and let us know what you think, because we want to know how it goes.
Feedback. I don't know if you all know. If you go into your app and go into the agenda and go into the session, you can rate each of the speakers. So for all of the speakers today and tomorrow, we do this because we love talking to people about marketing, but we really do appreciate the feedback. So if you wouldn't mind rating all of the speakers, I will put that plea out there for everybody.
Helps us get better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.